Okay, to start this review, we've really got to talk about how slim this new iPad is, because at the Apple event last week, that really was the biggest thing that most people were bowled over by, and I mean, you can see why. This thing is absolutely ludicrous in terms of how slim it is. But to put it in some form of perspective for you, it's slimmer than my M1 Pro iPad Pro. It's slimmer than my iPhone by a surprising amount. It's slimmer than my old iPod Nano, which is absolutely ludicrous. It's slimmer than the new Pencil Pro, which attaches to it. And it's slimmer than the MacBook Air when it's folded up. But the big question that was on my mind during the entire event, and the first thing I tested out when I got this iPad Pro in, is when you attach it to the new Magic Keyboard case, is it slimmer than the MacBook Air? Because this is the gold standard for taking things around with you, and the previous iPad Pro with the case was a lot heavier and thicker, and I'm really happy to say they're basically the same now. The MacBook Air is still a tiny bit slimmer, but we are talking in terms of like smidgens here. It's absolutely tiny, and I would almost go as far as to say it's kind of negligible, and that goes down to weight as well. Holding these two next to each other, it's very hard to tell any difference at all, and I actually ended up weighing them, and the iPad Pro with the case is about 20 grams heavier, and honestly it's very difficult to feel the difference, and if you're throwing that into a backpack or something like that, you're not going to tell at all. I'm sure a lot of you out there though are wondering, why make this thinner? The iPad Pro was already a pretty slim device, and making it slimmer just seems like it's going to be a durability issue or something like that. But what I can say after a little bit of use, I've had it for about 4 or 5 days now, is it's generally much nicer to use from everything you do. Now just holding it in your hand, this feels a lot lighter and a lot easier to just write or to do anything while you're walking around. And like I said, throwing it into a backpack with that keyboard attached just feels like a no-brainer now. There's no point worrying about weight or anything like that. And obviously battery life is another concern of making a product slimmer. That means you can't put as big a battery in it. And this one doesn't have as big a battery as last time. But thanks to the new M4 processor, you're still getting that same 10 hours of battery life which you got before. And I never thought the iPad had bad battery life, so to get exactly the same battery life out of this thing is totally fine with me. I've got no issues with that, and that seems to have held true as well. For the time I've been using it, I've been getting through a day no problem, and even in some cases 2 days as well. And because it is this slim, you're probably right to worry about the durability of something like this. And look, I'm sure a lot of YouTubers out there are going to bend this thing until it snaps and completely breaks, and that's been no different from any other tablet I've seen online. But from my use, this doesn't feel any different from the ones before it. But I generally treat my tech well. I don't throw it around or do anything like that. The only thing I do a lot of is throw it into a bag quite quickly, and sometimes my bags can be really heavy if they're full of camera gear, and I know over time that pressure can slowly bend something. I haven't had this long enough to see any of that change really happen to the iPad, but it's something I will be keeping an eye on for an updated review down the line. Let's talk about one of the biggest and best new features though, and that is the new OLED display. Now, I never thought the iPad display looked bad, especially the mini LED one on my personal M1 Pro iPad Pro, but sometimes it's not until you see something you realise how much better it can be. These OLED panels are insane. Apple is using tandem OLED technology. This just means there's two popped on top of each other for incredible brightness and incredible picture clarity. It's more complicated than that, but that's kind of all we really need to know. And these displays look absolutely stunning. And because they're so bright, viewing them outdoors or any situation I've been in has been a non-issue at all. You're getting those wonderful inky blacks, those super speculative highlights which look insane, and just anything you watch or do on here feels great. The iPad is mainly a screen, so getting a better screen in any regard is an awesome upgrade, no matter how you slice it. There's actually 2 options for screens this time around as well. If you jump up to the 1TB or 2TB iPad Pro models, you do get the option for nano texture glass, which basically reduces glare in any situation you're in. And I will say for most people, I would just completely avoid it. The standard screen to my eyes looks much nicer, and the only reason you should get this other one is if you're in a really high glare situation. So if you work outside a lot, or if you're in a place with a bunch of bright lights, it might be useful for you. But for most people, I really think you should stick with the standard one. That's what I'm gonna do. If you do want to protect that stunning new display though, that's where today's sponsor, Paperlike, comes in. Paperlike is a screen protector for your iPad that truly makes it feel like you're writing, drawing, or sketching on paper. Not only protecting your screen, but also getting rid of that unfamiliar feeling of writing on glass. If you're an avid Apple Pencil user like I am, you'll feel that difference immediately. Using their proprietary nanodot technology, Paperlike adds resistance and haptic feedback when using the Apple Pencil, emulating that wonderful paper on pencil feeling. It also works to reduce screen glare in really bright conditions. It's a similar effect to Apple's new nano texture display option for the iPad Pros, but it's still the only way to get the physical feedback on the pencil, so you can use it on here too. So if you want one as soon as they're out, or if you want one for your current iPad, then check out the link in the description below. And of course, a huge thank you goes out to Paperlike for sponsoring this video. Another huge star of the show here on these new iPads as well is the brand new Apple M4 chip, which was a huge surprise I think to pretty much everybody. The fact that the iPad has leapt the MacBook and the Mac was kind of crazy, but it was really cool to see. It's always nice to see a new chip generation kind of regardless of what product it's in. And look, Apple threw out a bunch of numbers and technical graphs about this sort of thing, but what you need to know is it's better performance overall, it's got more and better AI cores which are really great, and it's got the hardware enhanced ray tracing now, which is going to be great for games at some point in the future. So in every situation possible, this chip absolutely flies. But then again, so does my M1 Pro iPad Pro. That's my personal device, and seeing a day-to-day difference in general usage is really tricky to spot. There's no doubt that M4 chip is going to be way better if you're pushing loads of 4K edits, or if you're jumping into 3D rendering, or if you're doing anything really high powered, but for that general day-to-day stuff, it is tricky to tell the difference. It's also worth keeping in mind this time round that there is a difference in the chips that you get as well when you pick an iPad Pro. So if you get an iPad that's 256GB or 512, you're not only getting 8GB of RAM, but you're also getting a slightly binned chip, which has got a little bit less performance. However, what I will say is, again, you're not going to notice that at all unless you're absolutely pushing that iPad to the limit. I think I would even go as far as to say that 95% of us, probably myself included, won't see that difference, so it's really not something to be too worried about. Alright, let's talk about the new accessories, because I think Apple nailed these despite there being a few drawbacks as well. First up is the new keyboard, and this thing is absolutely lovely. It's aluminium now on top, so it's got a bit more of a premium feel, but the overall key travel and things like that make it really similar to a MacBook, and that's a really good thing. Typing on here is a dream, and now that there's a function mode, it's even a little bit more professional too. So you've got things like brightness going up and down and screen locks and all that sort of stuff. It's really great. One of my favorite things though is the trackpad got loads bigger, and it's haptic now as well. So it's not like a physical button, it's just a haptic one, which means it's probably going to last longer too. This is much nicer to navigate around iPad OS with, and again, feels more in line with a MacBook. It's also quite a lot slimmer and lighter than the last Magic Keyboard, which is an absolute benefit as well. The hinge on the back has also been redesigned, so that's a bit slimmer too, and it also takes power delivery up to 40 watts, which is awesome. I do wish it could take data, but the fact that it's got quicker charging built in is fantastic. I really like this keyboard. I think Apple nailed it. The only thing which kind of sucks about it is it's not backwards compatible, so this is only going to work on the new iPad Pro. The other new thing is the Apple Pencil Pro, and honestly, I think this may be the start of the show for me. I really like this update. The pencil, for all intents and purposes, looks exactly the same and feels exactly the same, but it's got some really cool new features built in. First up, it's got barrel roll. Do a barrel roll! This is super important for artists, and it's something I know I'm going to really enjoy using, but when you bring the pencil close to the iPad, you can actually rotate it, and then your brush or pen or whatever you're using will rotate with it, which completely mimics using a paintbrush or something like that, and it gives you a lot more kind of artistic freedom to do what you want. Barrel roll as well is really great in apps like Procreate, because you can use it really specifically with tools like Liquify to get some really nice kind of otherworldly effects, which would be really tough to get otherwise. That's also combined with this kind of stranger shadow idea, so when you bring your pencil close to the page, it will show a shadow of the tool that you're using, and this is a software shadow, so it just mimics what the light would look like in real life, and the shadow even changes depending on what tool you're using. The other thing which is great about this is it's now got haptic feedback and pinch controls. So if you've ever used AirPods before, when you pinch them to do something, this is now in the lower half of the pencil. So when you bring the pencil close to the iPad, you can pinch it and a menu will pop up depending on what app you're in, which will give you a bunch of new features, which lets you switch tool easily, which lets you undo things really easily. And in apps like Procreate or something like that, you can use it to select different layers and stuff like like that. This is a bit of a game changer for me. I love taking notes and I love drawing on my iPad, so having that quicker access to really useful tools is a really nice update, and I absolutely love it. The only bad thing about the new Apple Pencil Pro is they're not backwards compatible. So if you want to use this, you're gonna have to get one of the new iPads. And unfortunately as well, if you already own an Apple Pencil Generation 2, those won't work on these new iPads. So the only two choices are the Apple Pencil with USB-C or this Apple Pencil Pro for the new iPads. I personally think it's kind of worth it, but it's still a little bit painful if you've invested in the Pencil 2 already. There were some other little changes as well which Apple didn't highlight massively, so I'll go through those with you. If you're buying the iPad Pro or the Air here in Europe, then you don't get a power brick in the box. I think you do in America and everywhere else, but for the EU laws or something, you just don't get one. The camera has moved to the landscape position, which is awesome for video calls. This was long overdue, so I'm really happy they did it. The wide angle camera on the back has completely vanished and it's just been replaced with a standard camera. I'm totally okay with this. I don't think I ever even used a wide angle camera on my M1 Pro iPad Pro, so seeing this gone is no big deal at all. It's been replaced with a proper two-tone flash, and that's been used in a really interesting way. Now if you scan a document on your iPad and you get that horrible shadow over it, the flash will kind of fill up that shadow completely, so you get a much better scan of your document. And the final thing is, if you just buy the new folio case for the iPad, then it actually comes with a new angle as well, which just holds it completely upright, which is really useful. They didn't shout too much about that, but finding it out was really nice. And I think if you're not someone that uses a keyboard with an iPad, this is a cool little update to get for the Smart Folio. There's no doubt in my mind that this is actually some of Apple's best hardware they've absolutely ever made. The whole thing is just immaculate. A while ago, they used to class the iPad as just a magical sheet of glass, and I think this is the closest they've ever gotten to that. It's a really beautiful device, and I think you're going to hear this from a lot of other tech reviewers out there, but it's time for the software to really step up a little bit. I like iPadOS, and I don't think they should put macOS on here. I don't think that's the right move, but it's time for iPadOS to get better. They did that a little bit a couple years ago with Stage Manager and some updates here and there, but it's time for iPadOS to just make a little bit more use of what's going on here. That may well come to the iPad soon though. It's WWDC next month, which is kind of Apple's big software thing, and I would really hope that they do something with iPadOS at that point. But you've got to remember the software won't be released till later in the year, maybe even in the autumn or something like that, and you shouldn't really buy a product on the promise of what it's going to be. You should buy it on what it does right now. And while I was thinking about this, I did have like a small thought about iPads and the system as a whole, is sometimes I wonder if they're building these for the next generation of creators. So they're not for people like you and me who are watching these videos right now. Maybe they're for the people growing up with technology that have got a family iPad or have only ever used an iPhone or an Android device for their computing needs, and going up to something like an iPad which does quite a lot more but still has the same familiar interface and all that sort of stuff. It's just a natural progression for those people. I don't want to say that's for sure. I'm sure most people jump to a laptop and a desktop PC or whatever at any point. But for a lot of people, I can see this just kind of making sense. Just jumping up to a phone which is way more capable and you feel a lot more in tune with. That's just a thought I've had in the back of my head for a long time. Maybe this is a new computer generation for a new generation of people. Alright, lastly then, is this worth the upgrade? And here's how I'm going to put it. If you're a creator and you're not on any of the M series iPads yet, then absolutely. This is going to offer you so much more, and also future-proof it for ages with whatever updates Apple puts out. If you're not a creator though, and you just use it for kind of content consumption or enjoying browsing the internet, or if you're just using it for your general computing tasks, it's a bit of a harder sell to make you jump up there. And if you're either of those and you're already on an M series iPad, I don't think it's worth jumping up just yet. Like I said, WWDC is just around the corner, and there's a chance that Apple might give some really interesting updates to this iPad specifically. But until then, I would bide your time and see what happens. I'm personally going to stay on my M1 Pro until then, as these are loan units, and I'm going to see what happens. If there's something out there which is really cool and worth it, then I will absolutely jump up. Oh, and what I would say is, I'm usually a silver guy, but the new space black one looks absolutely incredible, and paired with the new keyboard, that is probably the colorway I would go to, but the silver is still absolutely beautiful as well. Anyway, that rounds up this video and kind of my week's worth with this iPad. I'm absolutely going to come back to this review to see how this iPad develops, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all in the next one.